Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And today we're going to talk about summer research students. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was okay. I'm feeling more and more like the semester is in the rearview mirror.
Ooh,
and that
nice.
is helpful. And it's also a Pearl Jam song, which is also good. So I'm into that. Sorry, I'm older. I always like, whenever I say these things and you look at me, I'm like, oh, I am a lot older than you. But anyway.
I'll look up Pearl Jam.
And I think also like we had the end of our semester, and then the kids' end of school is coming up too.
Ooh, great.
So
when's that
really
happening? How soon?
That's in like a week and a half.
Oh,
and so
definitely coming up.
yeah, I think they're into it, and I feel like I'm constantly struggling. This is turning into like my parenting podcast. Sorry. I'm like, but I really struggle with just like, and I struggle with this with myself too, like the kind of ebb and flow of whether more structure is better or less structure is better, or like more rigidity or less rigidity. And I think I just have to accept there isn't a rule and just being responsive day to day. But they definitely are quite over schoolwork. And yeah, I think they'll be happy to have just free form days of carefree frolicking. Lately they've been caretaking snails in our garden, which I shouldn't be encouraging because I don't know if I want lots of snails, but anyway. So
they are cute though.
True. But how was your week going?
It's good. You made me think of, it's not my turn to do the quote, but it made me think of this quote, which is everything in moderation, including moderation. And anyway, maybe you need that with the structure and flexibility, both in moderation.
I think part of my problem is with everything is like I just really want there to be rules.
Sure.
And then I don't have to figure things out. You just know what the rule is, and that is not how life actually works.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if we really worked at the rules, but it would take a lot of flexibility to get the rules super good.
Right, you'd have to be like when your child is doing this, then the rule is like,
right,
you'd have to actually be responsive. So Yep.
So my week was good. One of the things that I've been enjoying about staying home is the different kinds of cooking things that normally I'd be like, oh, that's like a long job. You have to be like at home. But like making applesauce, you like slice up some apples, put them on the stove, stir them periodically, and then then you grind them up and then you have apples. So that's like a super fun thing that's really easy as long as you're already at home. And then sourdough bread, which is like always been huge, because I mean I'm always into it, but it just seems like, oh, you got to make this starter, and then it's such a big job. And my mom has been really learning how to make sourdough and really has a system down, and she told me the system, and it was a long system, but anyway we did it, and it was really fun. And that's the kind of thing where you aren't actually spending that much time working on the sourdough, but it spreads out over a long period of time. So if you're already at home, it's a great time to do it. So anyway, I have been enjoying applesauce and sourdough bread making.
Dude, that's because I'm actually making chicken broth today.
Oh,
and
yes.
Because like you can't, I'm like too anxious to leave the slow cooker on the whole time. You know, and I feel like our electricity is a little random. Like there's a few sparks happening sometimes that shouldn't be. So yeah, I'm like, yes, I'm not going to leave anything plugged in. But there's so many of these things that like part of me the other day, I was like, why do I always just only do laundry on the weekend in these massive mountains? But since we've been home, I just have this like constant laundry happening.
Sure.
Because you're here and you can
Yeah.
pop over and put the stuff in the dryer, and it's not, so it's just, it's so different when you actually are present in your house.
Yeah.
Like the things you can do.
Totally.
Yeah. And a lot of this, I mean, I do actually want to go back to some semblance of a normal life in the future, but it really does call me to thinking about like the things that so much stuff, like the conveniences we have to have because we're in work all the time.
Right. That's a good point.
It's like, do we have to be in work all the time? Like, is that, so I don't know, lots of thoughts.
Yeah, lots of thoughts for sure.
Lots of thoughts.
So do you have a quote for us today?
I do, and I'm going to continue. Well, it's not actually a series because it's the second of two, so it's not like I've done. But I'm continuing my Irish authors. That's what I'm like at the moment. So we had Bram Stoker, and then my all-time favorite author of all time.
Wow!
I just said all time twice because it's so important.
So all time, yeah.
Yeah, it's this woman called Maeve Binchy, and
okay, writing it down.
She, oh my god, people would have described her work as chick lit years ago, but first of all, that's kind of a derogatory term about a whole branch of fiction. That's a whole other thing, but it's just so rich and wise and wonderful and perfect, and she is my favorite. And there's one book she wrote, I've read all her books, but one of them, I've read it like probably every 2 or 3 years since I was 12. Like,
wow,
it is like my best friend, this book, and it's actually called Circle of Friends. So it's like, yeah, whenever Eric wants to convince me how special something is to him, he's like, it's my circle of friends.
Wow,
like, that's how he can convey how important it is. But so she's just, and she was a journalist, and she was hilarious, like really funny, just wonderful, awesome person. And I just love her. And just to, of course, bring a little negative tone into it, she actually passed away the day before my daughter was born.
Oh, no.
And after you have a baby, you're kind of unhinged anyway. But I was devastated. Like, obviously never had any interaction in person with this woman, but she was like, she's a very special part of my life. Anyway, she's amazing. But so this is actually like, it's her kind of relaying an interaction that she had, but it was a taxi driver, and he said, Asher, anyone could write a book. And she replied like, yes, they could, but they don't. And so I really like that because I know, and it's like, it made me think so much about interactions that I've had like that, but also like, we don't honor the process of showing up. Like, that's actually the thing.
It's the thing. It is.
Yeah, and it's so much, especially it's sometimes some of the problematic aspects of physics is like relying on things like brilliance, or there's this, you know, innate thing, and it's the actual showing up and doing the thing that really matters.
I see. Yeah.
You know, and like there's so much of, like, I had an interaction after I got the job here, and I was back to work in my other place, and this guy came, he's like, oh, you got that job? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, I could have gotten that job, but I didn't apply because I didn't. It's just like, well, so what? Like,
then you didn't get it.
Right. Or like, do you ever hear students sort of saying to other students like, oh, you got an A, I could have gotten an A, but I didn't study. And you're like, but why didn't you study? That's not
right.
It's just such a cop out. And so, yeah, and then I feel like I have just a history of like, when people are putting themselves out there in the world, and there's just always some naysayer who's like, oh yeah, I could do that. It's like, but you didn't, and you're not in the ring.
And the putting yourself out there part is very clearly a very hard part. You know, that's so many people hold themselves back because of fear of putting themselves out there. So yeah, I love the emphasis on actually doing the thing.
Right. And then I'm just going to sneak in an extra quote because I love her so much. But she said another thing was like, I don't write about ugly ducklings growing up into swans. I write about ugly ducklings growing up to be happy ducks. I was like, yes, thank you.
Cool. I love it.
So yeah, she's my favorite. But and she was a Latin teacher, so she is still in the professor.
Oh, cool, perfect. Yeah. I'll have to look her up.
Is that a thing over here, like learning Latin in school?
Yes. I have a friend who's a Latin teacher.
Oh, okay. There we go. Yeah. Okay, cool. So sorry. Yes, I just went my whole thing about Maeve Binchy.
No, that's great. I'm going to look her up.
So this week we're talking about summer research students.
Yes. And
as you have already begun, would you begin with the, I don't know what my logic is there, but you know what I mean.
Yes. Okay. So just for context, so reminder, if you don't already know, that we're at a primarily undergraduate institution. Neither of our department has grad students at all. So we are talking about undergraduate students in the summer, but also they're the only students that are in our labs ever.
Yes.
So what is working for me for having summer undergraduate students? So this is my 4th summer, and this year and the past 2 years I've had students, at least one, working full-time in the summer, and that is working so well. And I think...
Is it always the same one?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good question. So the first summer I had one student, the second summer I had another student, and this summer I have 2 new students, and then one the student I had last summer is finishing up a few things but not working full-time for me this summer. So I really only have 2 summers in the past where I've had an undergraduate student working full-time. But in both cases, it's just an incredible different amount of time they can put in the lab when they're working full-time than when they're working during the semester, and if it's like 3 hours a week for 15 weeks, that's 45 hours the whole semester when you get 40 hours a week in the summer,
And is that what full-time means for you, is 40 hours?
That is what it means.
Okay,
I'm doing it a
cool.
little bit differently this summer because everything's online, and so I feel like it's a bit much for me to ask them to be at their computer 8 hours, but so I'm saying 6 hours. But in the past, I would say 8 hours is what I'm expecting from you each day for 5 days a week for 10 weeks. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they can get trained so fast. I've had students who say, gosh, we've been working on this method this whole year. I've always been astonished watching you because you just move your hands so fast. But it's really not that hard, and I've got it figured out now. And it's true. They just need, more time, especially time in a row, working on the method. And then once they're trained, they can get some things done and really contribute. And then if they're still around the next year, even though they have much less time, already being so well trained, they can still get significant stuff done and help train other people. And so it's just been huge boon to my research productivity to have people working full-time in the summer. Even just one undergraduate full-time in the summer just makes a huge difference for what I can get done.
That's awesome. And I think, it's interesting. So, I'm just going off on this whole thing, but it's always like really anxiety inducing for me, like writing a grant, because like, it doesn't feel like, especially now, the last thing I applied for wasn't evaluated separately because you're at an undergraduate institution.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And it's like, it's so different because of like what you're describing. Like you could have 15 kids in the lab, which, I mean, you never would, right? That would be crazy. But like you could, and if they're all just working 3 hours, and they're probably not even doing that with so much stuff on their plates,
and they're all
you
training.
never get that momentum going at all.
Totally.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just remarkable. Both cases of having a student, I mean, again, I only have 2 cases, but both of them where I had a student full-time in the summer, they were just, that not only did they get tons done in the summer, but then they just kept on cruising through the year and could train other people. And it was just monumental load off my back stuff happening, and also a great experience for them. So I'm super into that.
So tell me, do you go in for 40 hours a week?
No.
Good. Tell me more. I'm back interested in what
no,
you're saying.
definitely not. What I normally do is schedule a meeting with them once a day, at least at the beginning. Maybe they get cruising with something and we don't need to meet every day. But it would just be an hour a day at the beginning. This is the first summer I've had 2 full-time students, and I'm having them meet during the same hour. And so it's just, an hour a day. And I have no qualms with taking time off. So there's that week when I'm going to be in the recording studio. They're going to be on their own that week. We're going to talk again the next, after that week. And that hasn't really been a problem before. They know in advance that they're going to have to go along. And we try to make sure that they have some directions to go, even if they get stuck in one direction. So I don't feel like, it's definitely another thing. I have to remember that that's on my calendar and be sure that I'm there and make sure that I have help to help them keep moving forward and all that. But I'm not in there all the time. And this is, I'm starting with students who have already been working in my lab, so they know a little bit, even though the stuff that they've learned so far is probably going to be very small compared to what they learn in the first couple of weeks full time. They do already have their feet wet when they start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That does sound wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm into it.
Cool.
What about you?
So I think it's sort of a little weird for me because this wasn't my plan. I was not going to have any research students this summer. So I was like, oh, definitely not going to do that. And then now I have like 3.5 kind of. And so I definitely, though, I'm really stoked in a way, not stoked about the pandemic, but I'm like, actually, this is good for me because these kids are awesome.
Oh, good.
They're really great. They did they got a lot of work done last semester, and you know, I feel like we could get a big chunk of stuff done.
So
I
all
think
of these have already been in your lab, and they're continuing into the summer. Is that right?
Yeah, and the half one hasn't been in my lab, and
Okay.
so he is not getting paid.
Okay.
So I have weird feelings about that. Like, I feel weird about it, but he doesn't want to because it would mess with like other financial stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it's kind of that sort of weird. But the other thing I did that I was pleased about is I took 3 weeks off. So I was like, I will see you in June. We're not even going to really talk to each other.
Nice.
Until
Yes.
then. And so that was good for me, I think, because I do want to like I said before, I think when I talked about research students, I kind of honor the process and like really, and I haven't been in the past at times. Like,
Okay.
and I know if I just started straight away, I would be freaking out about the 15 other things I should be doing. So it was this was helpful to me to do that. And I think too, like, I need to manage their expectations.
Okay.
Because like last summer, one guy worked for me and he was awesome, but he was like, yeah, I'm going to take 2 weeks and go to Hawaii. And I was like, great, go to Hawaii, fly free. And he's like, no, I want to work when I'm there. And I was like, I knew that was not going to happen.
Right.
But I was like, sure. And it was just like so ridiculous. So I'm just like, no, we're not doing that this time.
I
like,
see.
You're taking a solid break. Like,
Yeah.
don't even, you know. So I think that was good. And I think maybe it's sort of, hopefully, I really do want to kind of establish like a good practice of them honoring the process too and being like, okay, we had our 3 weeks off and now we're ready to rumble. So
I see. Cool.
We're doing this. So I definitely feel good about that. I feel good about the break. And I kind of feel like I'm having percolating ideas and like stuff for them to do.
Oh, great.
Because I took a bit of space.
And so
that would be good.
How are you handling you're talking about honoring the commitment. What are you asking from them in terms of commitment?
Oh, dude. You're getting right into the working
okay.
on it. Yeah. Like, well, yeah. Do you want to go first with what you're working on?
Okay, sure.
Because I have a whole thing about that, yeah.
Cool. Well, I love your 3 weeks taking the time. That's cool.
Yeah, that was definitely helpful.
What I'm working on, and this is kind of in general throughout the normal year and in the summer, is so you've got multiple students and you've got multiple projects. How do you distribute the students among the projects, you know? And in particular, you know, I can see arguments for having individual projects for the different students, or maybe they're working in pairs or something like that, so that they can have more ownership and autonomy on the project and whatnot. But then I need to be thinking about all the projects that they're working on and making sure they're all moving forward all the time so that they all have something to work on, so that becomes a little tricky. Alternatively, it's cool if they can work together on whatever the main project is and really work on moving that forward. And I think theoretically, whatever the main project is could move forward faster. If everyone's working on that, we have all hands on ship. But in practicality, when I've tried to do that, we kind of go in a couple different directions, you know, so-and-so puts in a few hours and we go in a good direction, but then the next so-and-so didn't, the handoff didn't go quite smoothly and nobody really feels like it's their project.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm working on that and I kind of keep I feel like a pendulum, I go one direction and see a couple problems, then I go the other direction. So anyway, right now with my 3 students, I have 2 projects, and I have one of them is on one project, the other's on the other, and the third one's
God,
kind of.
You don't even have an even number. That's terrible. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think there's definitely, and I also think it depends on the project and the student. So there's lots of things there, but I don't quite have my system figured out for that yet.
Do you know, dude? I'm bringing it back to me, but no, this really, this really resonates with me about how I'm approaching the whole summer, right? Because I think we talked about before, I had my page and I wrote down all the projects, and then I'm should I just power through on one thing and get it done, or should I just keep hopping around to do the little bits and pieces of other things? And I don't know, and I think what I've come to in the end is a combination of the two.
Okay, how's that work?
So. Well, I think I was thinking there is going to be time. So say I have to write this grant by the 4th of August. So then obviously the week coming up to that will be all I'll be working on.
Okay. Designated.
But yeah, like if I decided like I'm going to work for 4 weeks on the grant now, I wouldn't finish it and I just wouldn't do,
Okay.
you know what I mean? Like even if I did work on it all the time. So it's so hard to know because lately, like my workspace is whenever, so I try and like push back the time when the kids watch TV
Uh-huh.
as late as I can. So like 4 o'clock is like usually when I kind of sit on the couch. It's in between when I need to make dinner and they can watch TV. And so I've been working on little bits and pieces, and it's sometimes that works for me because it's like a fresh thing and I have some new ideas about it.
Okay.
And I'm not just beating my head against the wall.
Uh-huh.
You know, so sometimes I'm a proponent of hopping around,
Mm-hmm.
and other times I'm like, you should just get some momentum and focus on one thing. So that's not helpful to
Totally.
you. Sorry.
No,
I'm
no,
like-
I do know what you mean because that's kind of the thing is there is the transition time if you're hopping around and the
Totally.
mental space of transitioning. But then you're right. Sometimes you might get to a point where you're like, well, I need to just let this simmer in my mind for a little while, so I'm going to work on this other thing. Or, yeah, because when you have that moment of opportunity, you have some new thoughts because it's been sitting there in the back of your mind. So, yeah, it is.
Totally.
I think in general, I'm more of a proponent for just working on one thing and trying to finish it, but obviously that's not practical all the time. So, and especially, if the students are independent and they can move forward without me, then that's great. But if I have to be there every step of the way, then I
Yeah.
can't be there on multiple projects every step of the way.
Is there an opportunity? I don't know. I have no idea like if this is actually practical, but would there be an opportunity to have everybody is chipping into this one central project and then you have your own little project that you're nursing by yourself and that's your like
Potentially.
so you could have like okay, like we're all powering through and getting this one big thing done, but meanwhile you're also doing this other thing.
Sure.
Or does that dilute the 40 hours a week then?
Well, one of the things that I guess I do think is working, that I didn't mention in the working section, is to give them something whenever you feel, if you are like, oh, I'm stuck, I'm not sure what the next step is, you can always go back and do this other thing that's useful. That's helpful. So if there is something like that could be like, when there's stuff to work on this project, that's your priority. But if there's not, then you can always work on this other thing. That can be good, I think.
Tricky.
I think it just depends on so many things, you know?
I just want there to be a rule, as you, again, back to me and my rules, but
Yeah.
it isn't, right? Like you said, like I guess some students that could work for it, other ones not, and some projects that could work for it.
Yeah.
But I think you're right though. Like I think ownership is an important aspect of it.
Yes. Ownership is
And-
very important. And I don't want people to feel like they're just contributing a tiny... Like, maybe if we had this big project that we're all working on and everybody has a designated piece of it, and you could have ownership over that piece,
Yeah.
I'd be into that. I want to say that there can be a rule, but but it would have to factor in the various projects and levels of being caught up with the project that the different students would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, some thoughts. What are you working on?
So I think I'm working on different things, like a few things. One is I really struggle with like there is different expectations, right, when people are being paid.
Oh.
And that's something I think I'm not that comfortable with.
Okay.
And I think when you said like, how are you going to get the students to honor? And I'm like, I have no idea. Because that's the thing I think we talked about in leadership before, about like accountability. And that's super uncomfortable. And it's not going to be that much of an issue with these kids because they're actually great. But I do want to kind of, because part of me is like, look, I wasn't going to do this summer and I have all these other things to do. So if I'm going to do this, it needs to be productive.
Okay.
You know, and so there's that. And like, do you have different expectations of your students when they're getting paid?
Well, I guess so. Normally I don't pay them unless they're really well trained from having already worked for me in the summer. Normally I don't pay them in the academic year. And then out of the ones who are doing awesome, I invite one or two to work for me for pay in the summer. In the summer, I suppose I do have different expectations. I mean, I always expect that they're going to come in at the set time and do the work that we're planning on them doing. But in the summer, that's a longer period of time. And so they should get more done, of course. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and then all of my stuff, I mean, all of your stuff too, I guess right now is remote and online, but like it always is. So like, because it's computational stuff. And so it definitely, yeah. But I think like I said, I think that might be a challenge I have to face another time when I don't have a group of kids like the ones I have right now, because they're pretty motivated. But so I think I just struggle with that kind of awkwardness of like, I kind of always want to be the good guy, and the other stuff like, oh, don't worry about it. If you have other stuff, it's fine. But now it's like, okay, but and my money is running out. So I'm like, okay, this money is even more precious.
This is very important money. Yeah.
yeah. It's like getting more important as it, like the value of it goes up.
Well,
I think, sorry, you go.
What I do is I say, I expect you to work X hours a day. Normally it's 8. This summer I'm saying 6. And then they often ask, like, does that count the time that we're meeting together? And of course it does. And if I thought to tell them that it would, then I would have mentioned that in advance. And we schedule out in advance which weeks they're going to work. So it's very clear, like a lot of times somebody wants to take a week off in the middle of June or something, and that's fine. We just schedule the 10 weeks, other 10 weeks, So I feel like we have that explicit at the beginning. And
that's something I think I've really fallen down on that before. And I think, again, these kids are awesome, so it's not a big deal. But in other summers, I kind of have gone into things and it's been really wishy-washy, like not a set start and stop date. And I actually think the stop date is just as important.
Oh, yeah.
Because if it's just kind of like, oh, we'll just work until whenever, it just sort of dribbles out in the end.
Sure.
And like having like, no, this is the 10 weeks. And so we're in week 7 and here's what we got done. Like kind of.
That makes sense.
That is super important. And I think I didn't have set expectations. And other times I've had students, and this summer I have one student who's, I'm not paying them. They're being paid by a different organization. And so that always feels a little bit different too, because they have other
the organizational obligations.
Yeah, totally. So I feel like the fact that half the battle is being mindful of any of this, and even the fact that I'm churning it over is more than I've done in previous summers, so that's helpful. But I also don't totally have a plan. Like I don't totally have this is the research question. Do you ever see when people talk about what research is like, and they're like, and you develop a research question, and then it's like, does anyone do that? Because I just feel like I stumble through one thing and I'm like, oh, that turned out that way. Let's try it again and see what happens if we do it. But like, change the temperature to this, or like, I don't have a plan. And so I would like to have at least a mini plan of like, these are the questions we should be addressing. Yeah. So I think I just need to muse on that a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think like the first summer I had a student, I was really worried about running out of things. So I just found I had this old list of like, these are the essential priorities for this summer, and these are this would be good, And I didn't make those in subsequent summers. But I do think I've at least mentally thought, like, this is what we're doing first. If we get through that, fantastic, and we can do this other thing. That kind of thing. And so I think that's helpful to have, like, I mean, it sounds like you have that in your mind as well. Like, this is what we're going to start with, and if we go further than that, fantastic.
Yeah, I wonder, and like I think I mentioned this before about research students in general, like having an end product. Like we had like a poster session on campus, which was virtual in the end, but being like, that's what we're going to do. And so I wonder, should I be kind of making a goal, like I want to write a paper for this thing, and then kind of working backwards from that, instead of, I just sort of stumble down the path, basically. And so, yeah. So
you're saying, should you have a paper in mind that all this stumbling can be towards?
Yes, exactly. So at least it's not total random walking around, but like actual. And like when I look back on things, it's like there has been, it does end up being kind of thematic.
Sure.
But like I think, and maybe I'm sort of projecting how I was at the end of the semester. Because at the end of the semester, I feel like I was just having these research group meetings and being like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Let's follow up on that thing.
I see.
But I think maybe to give myself a little break. Last semester wasn't the easiest semester to get through.
I mean, I do think there's lots of value potentially from just following up on interesting things.
Totally.
it might be worth periodically looking back and saying, well, we had these 5 interesting things. Do they connect together, and do we want to try to connect them? But I mean, following up on interesting things that come up seems really cool.
Yeah. So so I think all of my stuff is probably a work in progress, because like my thing that's working well is that I took a break and I'm still in it. So it's like I haven't got like a full report. But I think I'm into it though. I think I can get some good stuff done. My students, I don't have a lot of money, so I'm just like, they're each going to work 20 hours a week.
Okay, cool.
So that's what we're going for. But
are you having them work together or what?
So I have 3, and I think one is involved in this other project where like he has to do a lot of, it's almost like this other organization is running an REU. And so he is going to be doing a lot of things with them.
I see.
About other stuff. So I think I'm going to have him work on his own on one thing.
Yeah.
Just because he's doing all this other stuff. And then the other 2 have worked really well together in the past. So
great.
I'm going to keep them working together.
Perfect.
And then the other guy, he's just sort of interested in the project and interested in learning about it. Okay, I have a last question for you before we go. What do you do though if you have someone and they work for you all summer, and you're like, sweet man, we are trained, we're ready to go, the train is rolling, and then they're like, I don't have time to do research with you in the fall.
Oh man.
Do you say to them beforehand, like, hey friend, I'd really like it if this wasn't, because it's so hard, because we're like investing in their personal growth as researchers, but there is also like you want them to come and continue that work. So
interesting.
What do you do?
I was just thinking about whether that should be a requirement for working in the summer, that you're also going to work in the fall. I decided that I didn't want that to be a requirement, because what if they discover that that's not what they're interested in and they want to do this other thing, and that would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, well, one thing that I have done, like my student last summer, who was so well trained and completely independent and could just move, I could give him things to analyze and he could give me numbers. That's where we were at, And what I ended up doing was he was so valuable to me that I raised his salary to the highest possible for an undergraduate.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I raised it a little bit after the summer, and then I raised it all the way to the highest it could be after the next semester, just to as a tangible indication that your time is extremely valuable to me. Which of course you can only do if you have the funding for that project. But
that is a powerful thing, right?
Because I mean, I really truly felt that an hour that he spent in the lab meant that I didn't have to spend an hour in the lab, and so I wanted him to spend as many hours as he could spend in the lab. I was down for. So that's one thing that I did to incentivize him to stay.
I like that. And I hear what you're saying, the money, but there is other ways of kind of indicating to someone, you are very special, and you're doing a great job, and I appreciate you.
And it's extremely valuable to me that you are working on this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Make that clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. But it would be, first of all, I don't think we could do that. I don't think we could actually be you have to work with me in the fall. I'm not sure that would be allowed. And then you're right. What if they decide oh, I hate every second of this? Do you want to torture someone and make them work
and I
in
don't
your
want
lab?
to require them to do it. Yeah. That doesn't seem like a good way to do it, but hopefully it should all work out that they want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because part of my reasoning in this guy coming on board is a few of the people who are going to work for me this summer, one of them is graduating, so they will be gone. Mm-hmm. And then the other 2, I don't think they can register for a unit. And so I kind of want to download some of their awesomeness into this other person.
Right.
To kind of keep that chain of knowledge going.
Totally.
So, yeah.
That is an important thing. Downloading awesomeness from one person to another is a good thing to do.
Yeah. Maybe, I wonder, should we do another episode about summer research students?
Later in the summer?
Yeah.
Sure.
When I've actually started. Have some, not just aspirational things.
Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe midway through while the train is going and we're figuring out how to keep conducting it.
Oh, nice. I like with the train, the full train analogy. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you, Claire. I think actually all of these things, this reflection business it's a good thing, which is, it should be, because we're doing a podcast about it. But
it
like,
actually
it really
works.
helps me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does, because there's stuff that like, I'm like, I don't think I even have anything to say about this. And then you can't shut me up
Turns out
for 20
we do.
minutes. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
totally.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, cool. Thanks
you,
so
Ruth.
much. Thanks, Ralph. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know, if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.